The recent annual general meeting season has raised many questions about shareholder satisfaction, although the number of successful votes with the new two strikes legislation is perhaps lower than expected. But there are also voices calling for company directors and top management to weigh up many other stakeholders, from employees to suppliers, and throw out the idea of shareholder primacy. Well, Lynn Stout is Professor of Law at UCLA and has driven corporation stakeholder theory, the idea that companies are not just what management wants. And she joins me now. Lynn, welcome to the programme.
Thank you so much for having me, Tiki.
Now, you've come to a country, I mean, in the UK, of course, in the 90s we had the great stakeholder society, but you've come to Australia, which is a country which is a long way behind your sort of thinking. Shareholder primacy rules here.
Well, and it still rules in the United States, at least in terms of the attitudes that executives and directors tend to bring to the boardroom. It's not the law in the U.S., but certainly attitudes have shifted that way, and it hasn't necessarily done our corporate sector all that much good.
Well, it is, as I understand it, the law now in the UK. We had, of course, the James Hardie case, which looked at the duty of shareholders compared to employees, but then we had two inquiries, and it was felt that actually it was just as easy to leave the law as it was, and that directors could have that flexibility to be able to work out what was needed.
And flexibility has certainly been what corporate law has traditionally given directors. But in the past, if you had asked directors, at least in U.S. firms, what they thought the purpose of the corporation was, they would have told you that they were going to use their flexibility not only to take care of investors, who are very important and need to be taken care of, but also to look after customers, to produce good products, to play a positive role in the society, to look after their employees.
Is that what happened?
And it is what happened. For most of the 1940s through the 1950s, that was the attitude in U.S. boardrooms. That began to change in the 1970s and 1980s, and since then it's been full steam ahead, going toward the ultimate goal of maximizing shareholder value. Although, as we've seen, it hasn't worked out that well.
To what extent has the level of compensation impacted on this debate?
Well, compensation has been absolutely key, because one of the drivers of the embrace of shareholder value as the end-all be-all has been that, in the United States at least, we have tied executive compensation very closely to share price and to other share-based metrics. And when you've done that, you've really made it in the executive's own interest to pursue a higher share price. And it's understandable. That's what they're going to do.
I was speaking to a couple of directors the other day, and they said one of the mistakes has been the requirement to make public the levels of salary and packages, because actually that has simply led to a bidding war. It's very difficult for boards to keep packages down.
And that's absolutely true and backed up by the evidence. There have been studies that have shown that as countries have gone from allowing executive compensation to remain private to requiring public disclosure, that does create an arms race where every executive wants to make sure that they are above average.
So how do you stop? For instance, we've got two big supermarkets, pretty much a duopoly in this country. We've had all year concerns from suppliers. And then in August, the CEO of Woolworths says we're a public company and public companies are about making money. How do you change that mindset?
Well, the first thing I think we need to do is help people understand that this concept of the shareholder is a completely fictional concept. The idea that there's some artificial entity out there that only cares about the share price of one company is completely unrealistic. Shareholders are people. And people, most of them, have interests far beyond the performance of the price of one company's shares. So in, for example, the case of the two competing grocery stores, the shareholders are also customers of the grocery stores. If by suppressing competition, they raise the prices of their products, that may produce a slightly higher share price, but it may not necessarily do their shareholders that much good when they're also buying products in the stores.
So what do you make of a situation like Qantas here at the moment? We've got the chief executive of Qantas saying that, yes, it's an issue of share price, but it's an issue of job security of employees. But if I don't have the flexibility, there ain't going to be no Qantas.
Well, and if that is true, that is certainly a very good point. At the end of the day, even though directors and executives have a lot of flexibility, and I think for economic reasons alone should use that to take care not just of the particular shareholders in the company at that time, and bear in mind a lot of shareholders can be very short-term shareholders indeed. Turnover on the stock exchange is quite high. But they should have that flexibility, but at the end of the day, you have to make sure the company survives. So the fact that you wouldn't necessarily put everything on raising the share price today doesn't mean that you can go in the other direction and put everything on preserving job security for individuals in an environment where that's not sustainable.
And briefly, the shareholder base, does that have an impact?
Oh, absolutely. And so one of the other interesting things about the Qantas case and many cases these days is that corporations are becoming detached from any national allegiance as their shareholder base becomes international. The corporations themselves become international. And we have to understand that one of the consequences of that is that the managers of the corporation are going to feel less of a social and emotional and ethical tie to the welfare of the people in any particular country.
Professor Lynn Stout, thank you very much for coming in and joining us.
Thank you.